You're listening to a social justice podcast hosted by Nicola Spurling, brought to you by The Flag Shop, and inspired by a social justice coloring book. Hello, this is a social justice podcast. I'm your host, Nicola Spurling, and today we're going to be having a discussion about disabilities with my special guest, Rachael Ransom.
Hi.
Would you be able to introduce yourself, Rachael?
Sure. So my name's Rachael. I am a 27-year-old woman with a disability who, I guess I can give a little background on that. I was born 3 months premature with cerebral palsy and have been doing well ever since, working in film the last 5 years and doing some music stuff on the side as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for joining today. I'm looking forward to this discussion. In a lot of our episodes, sometimes I can chime in, sometimes I can't. In this episode, I don't usually use the word disabled to refer to myself, but technically speaking, I have ADHD and I have chronic pain because of shoulder problems. So I may be able to chime in a little bit here and there, but primarily I'll have some questions for you and we'll have some back and forth and we'll see where this takes us.
Sure.
All of the episodes that we do are very broad in nature, at least for the beginning. We're sort of covering these very big overarching topics. What are the big social justice issues in the world these days? Because of that, we can't usually touch on everything to do with every topic. And that's not going to be any different today because there's so many ways that a person might deal with disabilities. And obviously, we're not qualified to talk about all of those different ways. You've already listed cerebral palsy as something that you're going to be able to discuss, at least from your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I've talked about ADHD and my shoulders. Is there anything else that you just wanted to bring up in terms of your expertise or your lived experiences, things that you can touch on versus things that you can't?
I can also touch on scoliosis because that's a new diagnosis, I guess, that I've acquired in the last couple of years. I just want to bring home the point that I don't speak for every person with a disability. I don't speak for every person with cerebral palsy or scoliosis. I mean, someone could hear this and be like, I completely disagree. And that's okay. I think we all have different opinions on how we approach this because it is a pretty personal topic.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good caveat to start the conversation with. And with that said, and the same applies for me, I'm not going to speak for everyone who has ADHD or everyone who has shoulder problems, right? We're just going to speak from our own perspectives, and hopefully that's going to help our audience to get a bit of a better understanding about disabilities, but also that there's more work to do in terms of understanding what disability means. And that's exactly what I want to get into first, is what disability means. So Merriam-Webster defines it as a physical, mental, cognitive, or developmental condition that impairs, interferes with, or limits a person's ability to engage in certain tasks or actions or participate in typical daily activities and interactions. So my question around that is, do you think that is that your understanding of the definition? Is that a good definition? Just to make sure that we're all sort of starting from a place of understanding each other.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is limiting. It does hinder. It does get in the way sometimes. It's not, at least for me, I mean, I'm very thankful that I can still walk and do a lot of things that I love to do, but I do deal with chronic pain. I deal with balance issues, depth perception problems. Yeah, there are things that are going to be more difficult. And I think that's a really hard thing to hear and accept. And that was something that it took me a long time to get comfortable with. It's like, you gotta know your limit, play within it. I mean, it's cheesy, but it's true. Like, if my friend wants to go hiking, it's like, yes, I will join you. I love hiking. But here are things you should be aware of. I might fall. Not good on downhill. I'm going to be slow, especially if I have a backpack on. You got to kind of prep yourself for what you're about to do.
Right. Setting sort of expectations around what you're capable of and what other people should acknowledge before maybe asking you to do something like that.
Sure. I mean, but I think the bigger piece to that is negotiating that with yourself. Mm-hmm. And figuring that out. I mean, I've said yes to things and then got there and I'm like, oh, holy crap, this is hard. Like, my big one that I did, was it a year ago now? I went and hiked in Kelowna. It was like this 15-kilometer hike, and then you sleep, you camp, and then you hike out again. And I had never done like an overnight hike before. And I'm with my boyfriend and a couple of friends, and I warn them because they're like from Kelowna. Like my boyfriend grew up there. They hike all the time. They're buddies. Like that's what they do. I said, listen, I got invited. I'd love to be invited, but I said, I'm going to be slower than you guys. I might have some problems. I'll have a great attitude doing it because it sounds fun. But just like if you're thinking you're going to do this for the world record time, I should probably sit this one out.
Right. So I guess in some ways it's about understanding yourself and being able to set boundaries.
Yeah. And just, I wouldn't ever want to hold somebody else back from doing something because they'd be, like, I don't want to make Rachel uncomfortable by inviting her to this thing, and that maybe we'll just do something else. It's like, if you want to go do it, do it. I'll catch you next time.
Right.
Right.
You mentioned cerebral palsy being sort of the disability that you have experience with, that you understand maybe more so than others. Can you explain what cerebral palsy is and how it impacts your life?
Sure. I'll give a broad strokes for me anyway. So in my circumstance, it was, sort of brain damage at birth. I was born 3 months early and had lesions all over my brain. Doctors told my parents, like, look, she's probably not going to walk. She's probably not going to talk. She's probably going to be in a wheelchair and etc. They were like, you should prepare for that. And my parents were like, okay, we'll try and like wrap our head around this. And then a month later, they did the scans again, and half of them were gone on my brain. Like it seemed to have cleared up quite a bit. Nobody knows why at this point. It's just what happened. And what I was left with was my brain tells the muscles in my body to be flexed 24/7. So I don't have any relief there. My muscles are tight all the time. So I pull muscles often. I have lots of knots. And obviously I limp when I walk because my calf muscles are tight, so it pulls my feet into a more interesting gait. And recently, my muscles have pulled my spine into a bit of a curve now, so I've got scoliosis on top of that.
This sounds very similar to my dad has a condition called dystonia, and it sort of fires muscles uncontrollably. Do you know if it's similar to that in any way?
I've heard of that condition. I'm not entirely sure how they correlate. I mean, I do have spasticity, so if my muscles are super tuckered out, they'll start shaking and it kind of starts to cramp, feels a little bit sharp like a knife sometimes, and it's like pretty uncomfortable when that happens, but it does pass eventually. Right. So maybe they're correlated.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something he has had his whole life. It was something that came on later, but just when you were saying that the muscles are sort of doing these kinds of things without you necessarily consciously wanting them to, that it sounded very similar in that regard. Now, before we did the podcast, we'd been messaging back and forth, and you'd said that sometimes you feel disabled but not disabled enough. Can you maybe elaborate on what you meant by that?
So I feel like this is a personal sort of thought just on the way that I've lived my life. So in my life, I have friends who are disabled and friends who aren't. And sometimes in my circle of friends that are disabled, I'm like, oh man, like I have problems, but so do they, and their problems seem more severe than mine. And you kind of catch yourself feeling like you shouldn't complain to that person because maybe you feel in your mind that their struggles are worse. And you kind of got to check yourself a little bit and realize that, they're your friends and they're going to be there for you no matter what. And it's a safe space because they might not understand exactly what you're going through if it's a different disability they're dealing with, but they're going to be there for you. But I think in terms of medically, like I'm not classified. I don't have disability. I'm not, what's the term? Like I'm not, on disability, I guess.
Right. Okay.
Like I don't receive any sort of payment from the government for being disabled. But of course, I walk into any doctor's office and say like, yeah, I have cerebral palsy. And they're like, oh, okay. Yeah, it's mild. Okay. But like things like handicap, stickers for your car or those kinds of things, I don't qualify for that because they say literally that I'm not disabled enough. Same with the disability tax credit, all this stuff. So I'm like, okay, cool. Where does that leave me? Like, where do I fit. I'm kind of in the middle because, obviously I don't want to go on disability simply because I don't feel I need it, because I'm fortunate enough that I can work, and I'm very grateful for that. But, there are some circumstances where I'm like, okay, yeah, but like sometimes I have really hard days where I, struggle to walk and would appreciate, a closer parking spot when we're going somewhere. I mean, I'm still learning how to drive, and I'm sure we'll get to that in a bit. But yeah, it's those kinds of things where you kind of wonder, like, where do I fit here exactly?
Right.
And
so
you
there's
feel
almost
awkward.
like an identity tied to it.
Yeah, and it feels awkward because you're like, somebody might need this more than me. I don't know if I should take it. Like, for example, seats on the bus. If I see an older person or someone who's really struggling, I'll give up my seat for them, no problem. Which puts me at risk. My balance is terrible. I will fall over, but because unless they see me walking or moving, they might not know that I have a disability. I've also been asked, like, hey, I need a seat. And it's like, oh, okay. And then, I don't want to sit there and be like, well, I'm disabled too. Like, I need a seat too. Sometimes I've done that if I really am feeling, the thing with CP that I get is a lot of pain. I'm in chronic pain all the time because the muscles are always tight. So sometimes, yeah, I need to sit down and I have to be, say, I'm sorry, I also need this seat, right? But it can be difficult because when I see that somebody else needs it more than me in that moment, of course I'm going to get up and give it to them.
Right. It can be a challenge to be a self-advocate for yourself. It's I think something a lot of people struggle with, whether they have disabilities or not, is just advocating for what they need in any given moment. And I think that's probably a pretty universal feeling of I shouldn't complain because someone else has it worse as well.
Yes.
Right? Like, there's definitely instances where I'll go, why am I complaining about being depressed, or why am I complaining about being whatever, like sore from soccer practice, or anything really, because someone else could have it worse. And I think a lot of people just don't recognize that we all have struggles and we all have upsides, and you can't just constantly compare yourself to other people. You just need to figure out how to deal with that for you.
And that's something that I struggle with, because sometimes it does feel like I'm in that between. Like, sometimes I even forget I am disabled. And that's always fun because I'll have a few really good days where my body's giving me some grace and I'm able to get a ton of stuff done. And guess what? I overdo it. I go way too hard at the gym. Like, I'm trying to get back into exercise, and I, go super, super hard. I'm like, yeah, I feel awesome. The next day, destroyed. Like, I'm like, oh my God, I pulled like 3 muscles, and what was I thinking? And now I'm going to be, like this for a week. And it's like that little reminder, like, oh yeah, you are disabled. It's not in your head. It's there.
Well, and speaking of being in your head, I have very similar experiences with my ADHD, which is more a mental side of things, where I'll have a ton of energy to do all of the things, right? I want to do everything, all these hobbies I want to do, and I'll just go flat out doing them for week, 2 weeks maybe, and then suddenly I'll crash and I can't do anything for a week, and I'm so hard on myself. Like, why aren't you doing anything? Without recognizing you've just worn your brain out, and now it needs to recover, right?
You did all the things 2 weeks ago, and now your brain's like, we're done. We did them all.
Right. And it's hard for me, like, in the moment to go, you're not doing badly. Like, when you look at the overall, let's say I take a year of my life, it'll be a series of waves, right? Sometimes I'm having a great time, and other times I'm crashed and I'm not able to get out of bed for a while. But overall, it sort of averages out. And so I find, and maybe you struggle with this, it's really hard to be easy on yourself when you're in those moments of, I can't do the things that I want to do that I can sometimes do.
Yeah, like, I feel sometimes like I'm at war with my own body. And I'm sure this is something that a lot of people can relate to. Like, over COVID, so before COVID, I was doing some boxing, and then the pandemic happened and everything shut down and whatnot. So I was like, okay, well, I want to still exercise. So COVID exercise, I'm going to take up running. Now, obviously, that comes with its challenges when you have an interesting sort of gait and muscle issues. But I was determined to run. And I would push myself to run every day, no matter what. And I was getting pretty good at it. And they talk about runner's high, right? Where it's like, yeah, you're getting that adrenaline and all of the endorphins and everything. But for me, it was like next level because I was like, I'm in pain. My body is obviously struggling, but it's mental and I can push through it and I can beat it. It's like I was at war with cerebral palsy in that way. Like when I was running, I was winning. And then I hit 15K. I actually made it. I ran 15K. Now I don't want to set any super high expectations of what I actually did. It was like a run walk situation, but I still made it to 15 kilometers. And then I found out that I had scoliosis. Mm. My back pain increased. I went to the doctor. He recommended I go for x-rays, and they discovered that my muscles were tight in my back and they were pulling my spine into that curve. And I started going to physio, and the physio guy was like, yeah, you gotta chill on the running. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, when you run, it compresses. There's compression there, and it's actually aggravating it more. So, you need more low impact stuff. And I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, I was so angry because that thing that I used to like mentally combat my disability is now being taken from me. So the whole thing of like, I would find exercise that I love to do and then be told, no, things are getting worse. You can't do this anymore. You got to go easy on yourself. Now I'm trying to learn to love swimming. Because it's a low impact exercise, and I've started doing the elliptical as well because it's a little bit lighter, but it's just the constant adapting. When you're disabled, and sure, everybody can adapt in their life, but when you're disabled, you get into these routines and they change really quickly based on your body's needs, and you have to just pivot, and that can be really hard to swallow. So often you're just like, oh my god, again, I have to find something new again. I was happy doing this. I'd love to go and get back into it again, but my body's telling me differently, and you have to pick your battles, and unfortunately this is one that I can't win. You have to kind of, I feel like there are moments where it's me against my body, and there are moments where I have to go, okay, let's work as a team on this one and figure it out. It's a love-hate relationship for sure.
Right. And I guess playing those mental gymnastics of, I did love this thing. I can't do it anymore. So I need to now learn to love another thing because that's my only other option, really.
Well, and when you deal with chronic pain, like it's the weird, okay, I'll give you an example. My family and I were getting ready to go to Disneyland on vacation. And I went to the bathroom, and little graphic, but I was peeing blood. And it wasn't my period or anything. So I went and told my mom, and she's like, okay, it is 11 p.m. We're getting on a flight at like 6. So we need to go to the hospital and figure out what's going on because it could be serious. I was like, okay. We go to the hospital, and I find out that I have a kidney infection. So it was a bladder infection. Then it got promoted to a kidney infection. And the doctor's looking at me, and he's like, did you not feel pain in your back and when you were going to the bathroom? I was like, not really. I mean, my back always hurts. He's looking at me like I'm crazy. And I said, well, I have cerebral palsy. And he's like, okay. Yeah. He goes, okay. And he was like, you're not going to travel. He said, if this was 3 days later, you could have been in serious, like he said, you would have been in the hospital admitted. Like, it was that serious. And I just didn't even register. And so he told me, he's like, yeah, you can't travel. I said, well, that's too bad because I'm going on this trip. I'm not canceling my trip. So he gave me 5 random pills. I still don't know what they were. Took it, and it was an uncomfortable flight. But by the time we landed, I was feeling much better. And, it worked out. But I feel like with my body, sometimes it's like sometimes I'm in tune with it. But a lot of times I have no idea what's going on in there, and I miss stuff all the time. Like the scoliosis thing, I should have noticed it earlier, but I only noticed it because the pain increased, but it took a long time for me to notice the increase because it's always there. It's like white noise, right? You're just so used to hearing it. You don't know to listen for more because it's just some days are good, some days are bad, but there's always something going on there.
Right. And I guess the level at which that pain is occurring is so different for different people. Like I have chronic pain, but for me right now, it's more of a slight discomfort. And it sounds like for you, you're having so much pain that you can't necessarily differentiate other types of pain.
Yeah.
Or there's some videos that I've seen of people trying devices that sort of simulate childbirth.
Oh, yeah.
And they can rarely ever handle the pain that, I shouldn't say men and women, because, you know, people who are pregnant, right, are experiencing a certain level of pain throughout pregnancies that other people may not be able to understand, or it could be period pain, right? And I don't have experience with that as a trans person, but I've heard that can get quite severe. And in fact, I have friends who it gets very severe for it. So it's entirely possible that one person is seemingly fine, but they're experiencing a level of pain that is incomprehensible to another person who also seems fine. Yeah,
and it's funny to even talk about because, you know, for me, it's just my normal. So I wake up, it's the same. It would be like, I guess, somebody who doesn't have chronic pain just waking up and going about their day. Like, some days are like that because I'm like, oh yeah, whatever, it's all normal. Some days, it's an increase, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I'm feeling pretty crappy today. Like, this hurts way more than usual. I use a lot of, like, heating pads. Heat is a blessing, my friend. Like, you put, you know, those microwavable ones with the, you know, pop, like the kernels or the beads in there. You throw in the microwave, it's all soft. I have those. I have a obsession with sloths. You know, the sloths, the animal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with them. So my boyfriend made me a, like, wraparound heating pad, but he made a sloth on it.
Oh, that's cute.
It's adorable. And the, like, buckles are like her claws. It's super sweet. But, like, yeah, lots of heating pads, hot baths, and just, you know, rest when I need it, but I'm bad at that. Because it's always again, it's like this mental, like, I can keep doing the thing that I'm doing. I can keep going. It's not that bad, is it? And then I go too much, and then I get hurt. Like, I'm actually starting to go to the gym again and doing, like I said, the swimming and some little bit of safe weightlifting for my old back. I feel like I'm 85 saying that. Like, soon I'll be in there with the swim caps doing aerobics. But my sister, actually, she's really good at like heavy lifting. You know, like the Instagram or like the influencers, you know, the fitness. Yeah, that's like my sister, but she's way cooler. But she gave me a workout plan, and she has 2 days of rest in there because she knows that if she doesn't implement, like, okay, this day you're doing nothing, I'll just do it every single day, and then I'll get tired, and then maybe I'll fall off the wagon again. Like, she's going for consistency. And I think that's a good word for people dealing with chronic pain and disability. It's like, it's hard because you can't really find consistency, but you learn what your body consistently can do, and you learn what it can't, and you learn kind of what your own normal is. And sometimes it's completely fine. Like, winter is usually the hardest for me personally because it's colder and everything tightens up more.
Oh, okay.
So the other thing I do is I do get Botox injections, which are not for cosmetic purposes. What they do is they take Botox and they inject it into my muscles. So I don't know if you're squeamish at all.
No, and actually this is what my dad does for his dystonia as well.
Really? Okay, yeah. So you know all about that. The big needle that goes into different parts of the muscle, and then they inject it, and it tears the muscle fiber to kind of, like, the brain is like, flex, and the muscles are like, we can't, because this stuff is in us now. And it lasts for about 4 months, which is great, but I always feel it starting to wear off, right? But, of course, it's not something I want to do more than once or twice a year, because if you keep doing it, eventually, over time, for years and years, it can have the reverse effect.
Oh.
Where those muscles aren't as tight, and, it could go the other way. I think for me that would be pretty rare, but, it is botulism, so it's not something I want to do all the time. But it does help get through the winter, that's for sure. And then sometimes when you're like, I mean, for me personally, having CP, when I'm on the table and they, of course, when they stick a needle in there, well, they're not going to be very happy, my muscles. So they'll start spasming.
Ooh.
And then they have to, like, get this electromagnetic shock started to tire the muscle out. So I've literally got a needle in the muscle. They're moving it around, trying to find the right spot. They got this, like, little ultrasound machine that they're watching to see where the needle's going in the muscle. Then they're trying to tire it out with the electromagnetic, like, stim situation, all while I'm lying there going, we're good. It's good.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's not that many people that do it. I personally go to GF Strong. They're great over there. Amazing people, amazing team. But sometimes they'll have interns that come in that are learning. And so what do? I volunteer myself to let the interns, give it a shot, right? And when I first started doing that, my dad, who used to take me to my appointments, he'd be like, Rachel, you don't have to say yes to this, right? Like, and I'm like, yeah, but you know what? They've got to learn how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And if everybody says no because they're afraid of what's going to happen, I mean, nothing too terrible will happen. These people do have training. The only thing that I've dealt with where they hit a couple of nerves along the way. And that's, I don't know if you've ever had a nerve get hit with a needle before.
Yeah, once.
Yeah, it's kind of like,
boing,
right? Oh, you like straighten up a little bit. I've had that a couple times, but for the most part, they were just super grateful to have the opportunity to try. And let me tell you, they're a lot more nervous than you are on the table because they don't want to fuck up either, right? They want it to be a nice, calm experience. Well, as calm as it can be, really. So, I mean, things like that are great, but those organizations, there's not a lot of them around, like GF Strong. And actually, GF Strong is stroke rehabilitation. That's what they mainly specialize in, but they also do, they have a spasticity clinic, and that's where I go for my stuff. But, like, that's one place, I think, in Vancouver. I don't know about the rest of BC, but, I mean, I didn't have ample choices.
Right.
Put it to you that way.
Take what you can get in some situations.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And you're waiting months. And before you get in there, you have to get a referral, and then they have to assess you, and then they can get you on the waiting list. And people are always waiting.
Yeah, it takes ages with our medical system for anything. Like, talk about ADHD. I was on a wait list to get diagnosed for that for a couple of years, I think.
Just to get diagnosed.
Yeah, it takes a while. I mean, I don't need to go into the whole story of why things took longer, but there was misdiagnoses, and there was referrals that were ignored and things like that. So.
See, but that's the kind of stuff that, like, people with disabilities and we deal with that all the time.
Yeah.
Like, when I get my Botox injections, when I had cleared it through my health insurance, they denied my claim a million times because they're like, we don't do cosmetic procedures. And I'm like,
because they sell Botox on there, right?
I'm like, listen, Betty at insurance company, I am not getting lip filler or any other kind of filler for that matter. This is like, so I can move better. This is like, and the amount of times I get on the phone and try to be calm and try to be like, listen, like, this is my situation. They're like, oh yeah, that should be no problem. I'm like, then why do I keep getting denied? It's like, oh, it's just the name of the drug. Like, people, and I'm like, great. Can someone clear that up? Can somebody, when I was in school, I ended up getting a government grant due to having a disability for going to university. This was like, God, I'm 27 now, and I graduated at 22. So yeah, it was more than 5 years ago. God, I'm getting
I'm
old.
older than you.
Oh, so, they would be like, oh, your loan is approved. I'm like, well, that's great, but this isn't a loan. This is a grant. I don't have to pay you guys back for this small chunk of education. So, you're always getting on the phone. You're always correcting or trying to, figure out what they're saying and why. And I don't blame anybody for this. Like with my driving, I got told that, yes, I can learn how to drive. And my aunt has polio, and so I have exposure to driving with a physical disability, driving with hand controls, so that I don't have to worry so much about what my legs are doing, because, they're my main problem children. Like I have CP in all 4 limbs, but in my hands it's much more mild than in my legs.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, I go and I got 2 out of 10 on my depth perception assessment. And I said to them, I'm like, does this mean I can't drive? They're like, no, there's tools you can do to like learn how to drive even with this. And I was like, okay, like this seems like could be an adventure. Mm-hmm. And it, I'm still learning how to drive because of that, because my depth perception is bad and I don't want to be afraid to be on the road. The hand controls are great. Like, I mean, it's just a lever that connects to the gas and brake pedal. When I pull towards me, it's gas. When I push away from me, it's brake. And then because this hand is busy, I have a little ball on my steering wheel that helps me turn it all the way around. Mm-hmm. The only time it's awkward is when you're going through a drive-thru, you got to park it. Oh, because you can't reach over and get, because your car's going to roll, right? So, I mean, little things like that.
Right.
But yeah, like I wish someone had told me that my depth perception was bad because of the brain damage I had at birth. And, they did say, they're like, yeah, a lot of people who don't have CP also have bad depth perception. Like, it can just happen. Mm-hmm. But he goes, you are more prone to that because of what you've been through. Also, a new thing I've learned about is place blindness. Which, and I could be getting this wrong because I've only read about it a few times, but like, I can go to some place like 30 times and I will forget how to get there. But I have a great memory. Mm-hmm. Like, I remember people's birthdays, their names, directions. I am useless. No matter how, like, even, like, I worked at this office for 5 years. For the first 2, I was still, like, double-checking how to get there.
Interesting.
Because I was like, you're like, wait, where am I? Like, and even if I'm on the wrong side of the street as before, I have to, like, take a second and figure it out.
Yeah, it's interesting how our minds work, because the closest thing I can think of to that I deal with is, I think it's called object permanence, where I will put something down somewhere and it's not where it's supposed to go, but then once it's there, my brain just goes, well, that's where it is. So my place can become a total mess because every time I put something down, my brain I don't go by it and think, that needs to go back to the place it belongs. Oh. So I just, like, some days I look around and go, why is my place so messy and disorganized? And it's because I've got all these things lying everywhere that they're not where they should go, but I don't have that thing in my brain that goes, put it back where it's supposed to be.
So can you then, if you have a moment, can you put those things, like if you go, oh, my place is so messy, like what the heck? And then you're like, oh, I'm going to clean up now. Like, will you...
I can remember where they go. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's less of I'm just going to do this piece at a time. It's sort of things will accumulate and they won't bother me for quite a while. And then suddenly I look around and I go, my place is a disaster and I need to do a deep clean. For me, that's actually tonight. I've got people coming over tomorrow. And my place is a disaster. Yeah. So once we're finished here, I have to go home and I have to do probably like 5 hours of cleaning, right?
Oh,
or not so much cleaning as organizing, because it's just all these objects which have now become scattered around the place. They all need to go back where they belong. And then a month or 2 from now, it's going to be the same situation again.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have that problem and I still am like that. Mm-hmm. Like, I find, like, I never finish laundry. Mm. Like, I'll wash it, dry it, and it sits in the laundry basket. I have a clean laundry basket and I have a dirty laundry basket.
I do the exact same thing. For me, it's with, I don't have a dryer. So I wash the laundry, I hang it to dry, but then it doesn't make it from the hanger back to the
dresser or
wherever it belongs. Yeah, I just pull it straight off the hanger and wear it and go about my day. Or dishes. So do the dishwasher, but I'm really bad about reloading the dishwasher because I don't take things out once they're clean. I take from the dishwasher once it's clean, and then I refill it once it's empty. Yeah.
Adulting is hard.
It is hard. And especially when you've got all these different cognitive issues at play, as well as just the regular struggles of adulting. So I've already kind of talked about how I don't really associate the word disability with me. And maybe that's just because I don't want to. I don't know. But I don't view ADHD specifically as a disability in my mind, because it sort of evens out, like I mentioned before, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's sometimes I'm going really hard and I can accomplish a ton of stuff, and it almost feels like a superpower in those moments. And then in other moments, it's a crash and I can't do anything. I've had times where I've been basically in bed for a week, not really doing anything because I'm sort of recovering. And it used to really bother me. And my therapist has just said, this is, sort of the natural progression of how ADHD works for you, at least. And you shouldn't be so hard on yourself, because look at those 2 weeks where you got a ton of stuff done. You deserve that recovery period. And it makes sense that you need that recovery period. At the same time that it's sort of a superpower in some instances, there's other aspects like anxiety, depression, OCD, impulsivity, swings in energy levels, overthinking, insomnia, all sorts of different aspects that I don't know how many of them are related to the ADHD and how many are their own separate issue, but I deal with all of these things, and it can be incredibly overwhelming, incredibly debilitating at times. So I guess the question is, do you have similar experiences of having challenges that are more of a constant versus sort of something that comes and goes in waves, like what I deal with, or is that your experience, or is this something that you've, I guess, learned how to manage so that you don't have to go through that as much?
Oh, it's a good question. I feel like for me personally, it's always changing. There are things that I deal with regularly, though, like the depth perception thing is pretty constant. I went home to Delta, BC for Christmas with my family, and I was going into my parents' room, and they watched me just walk head on into the door frame. Ooh. And it's one of those moments we just all bust out laughing, because like they know me and love me, and they're just like, "Whoa, like you good?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I thought I cleared it. I guess I didn't, because I have no sense of, to me, I'm looking like I'm going to walk right through the door, obviously, but that's not the case, right?" Mm-hmm. So those kinds of things are difficult, because people do, like, outside, your circle, if you're dealing with colleagues, they'll give you a look like, "Did you just walk into the wall?" And it got to the point where at my last job, I would walking into my boss's office, and I just pretended like nothing happened. I just kept rolling on to what I had to say and moving on, and she would be like, "Are you good?" I'm like, "Yeah, you good?" And she's like, "Yeah." And you just pull those right over it, right? Mm-hmm. It's awkward. It's embarrassing. Similarly, like with falling and tripping, obviously my feet are like this a little bit. So like I obviously walk with a bit of a limp. I trip over my own feet a lot of the time. I constantly, also because of the depth perception, when I pick up my leg to clear something, like if something's in the way, I see that thing, I know I want to step over it, but I don't know how high my leg needs to go in order to make that happen.
Right.
Because I think I'm going to clear it, but oftentimes I don't. And so, tripping and falling is the norm. Fatigue is a big one.
Because like physical fatigue from your muscles constantly being stimulated?
Yes. So, sometimes at the end of the day, I'm like, I need to go to bed right now. And like, I'm tired, but I can't sleep. So it's like getting into that like sleep kind of mode is hard sometimes. But my body feels like it just got a workout in. Mm-hmm. And I asked a doctor, I was like, am I burning? Like, I should be burning, because they say that people with CP use 5 to 7 times more energy than the average bear who doesn't have CP. I don't know how true that is, but I do feel it. Mm-hmm. And I think, oh my God, why? Like, I should be right back on the fitness train then. Should be burning way more calories. Like, what the heck? Mm-hmm. But it's not always easy. I dealt with, high blood pressure is a thing because of the tightness. Okay. Getting blood flow is interesting. And I'm on birth control as well, so that doesn't help the situation. I've kind of I took a year off birth control just to see if it was just in fact the birth control, and it wasn't. Mm-hmm. So it is a CP related thing. It did get a little bit better off the birth control, but that's something that, I chose to take and choose to be on for my own reasons. So, it is something that I check in on with my doctor, because people with CP are more prone to heart issues because of how hard it has to work. Like if I exercise and I'm doing cardio, like when I was running, I'd have to be careful. My heart rate would go in the 200s. And I'm small, like in stature, I'm like 4'10". Mm-hmm. So, that was always like, oh, I can feel my heart really. Let's check my handy dandy Apple Watch for a second. Oh, 206. Okay, maybe it's time to slow down before because I don't know how high. And so I always learned like new questions to ask my doctor. Like, hey, is this CP related? Oh, yeah, probably. Yeah. I'm like, great. Can someone, I think my biggest problem with this was that, because I had it from birth, people see CP as like a child's disease. Mm-hmm. And that really bugs me because it's like, listen, when I turned 18, last time I checked, I still had CP that day. Mm-hmm. So it didn't end. Things are slowly getting worse with age. Doctors say that it doesn't progress. It doesn't get worse. I beg to differ because aging is hard for everyone, let alone people with chronic illness. And I think the one piece to this puzzle that is interesting too is because I have CP, because I know that last year or the year before I got scoliosis, I think it was 2021, so yeah, a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. That was new, and I was like, oh, and it's caused by the CP. Like, there's no other explanation.
Right.
So I'm like, damn. So now I'm learning that things will pop up. And that's a scary thing too, because you're like, what else is gonna go wrong? So then you start having conversations. My doctor asked me a couple of years ago, do you? And I was 25 years old. He says, are you planning on having children? And I'm like, well, 25, so not anytime soon. But yeah, I'd like to have kids one day. And he goes, okay, better sooner rather than later for you. And I was like, well, isn't that the case for every person who wants to conceive, who is going to carry a child? Shouldn't they? He goes, yeah, but for you, it really does matter because it'll be really, really hard on your body to carry a child. So you should be young and healthy but also ready mm-hmm. With the right person and at the right time. So it's like this weird thing where, and it's not just with kids, but overall, that clock for my life, traveling. I just got back from a backpacking trip. It was amazing. My boyfriend and I went. It was an unforgettable experience. But I literally quit a job I had for 5 years and said, I'm going to go travel Europe for 2 months because I need to do this in case in 10 or 20 years, maybe, I don't know. What if I can't walk anymore? Mm-hmm. I have to do this so that I can do it while I can do it,
And it seems like that's something that women in general often deal with within the medical industry when it comes to getting pregnant mm-hmm. is a lot of misinformation, a lot of misogyny, things like that. So then you have to wonder, where is the intersection between that and having a disability? And is the information I'm getting something I can rely on? Do I need to get a second opinion? There must be a lot of that happening.
And there's always those stories where people go, well, I had a baby at 40 and I was fine. And it's like, great. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's very personal. I mean, they call pregnancy at 35 geriatric pregnancy, which I'm like, excuse me? Am I going to be called 35 years old geriatric? Those are things that I don't think should be sentenced together, but that's the way it is. And so it's something that, and of course, because I've never been pregnant myself, and I don't plan to for a little while yet, I don't know what to expect. So you only have, and yeah, my mom is keen to answer questions and the women in my life, but they also don't have CP2. Mm-hmm. So it's finding that community of women who understand, no, it's totally fine. And I've had a couple people say that to me, you'll be totally fine. It's fine. But you just never know because every person is different. Mm-hmm. So you're constantly, like you said, kind of wondering, should I really listen to this hard or should I, go whenever I feel like we're ready and it's time. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I've done that with a lot of things in my life, like traveling, and just career-wise too, like, wanting to work extra hard and move up the chain and do more and take on more, because what if one day I can't? And it's like, what? Like you work, I work in film, but I don't work on set. I am in the office doing production type stuff and writing and all that. And it's like, but what if one day my hands stop working? Da, da, da. Like, it becomes almost irrational, because I'm like, that would take a lot. That would take me, like, not going to physio anymore, not doing my stretches, not, like, taking care of myself, right? But that's also exhausting. I mean, sometimes I go through days where it's like, okay, today I'm not disabled. Today I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm going to not do my stretches because I don't feel like it. I'm not going to the gym. I'm going to reschedule that physio appointment because I just don't want to do it. You get tired of the maintenance of chronic illness. Because, everybody has shit that they have to do in their life that they don't want to do, right? Adulting in general. But when you add that your body is also your job, or, for people that deal with, their mind is also their job, it's like you have two jobs. And then if you have side hustles on top of that, well, you've got more work to do. It's like, when does the work end? And, you keep thinking, like, I'm one of those people where it's like, I'm all or nothing. So I will go to the gym 6 days, 7 days a week, every day for like 6 months. I will get in really great shape. I will feel amazing. And then I will hit a wall like you wouldn't believe. And I will, you know what? I can miss the gym, whatever. And then I'm back to square one again. Like, I'm not good at, I want to say not good at being consistent, but like, it's all or nothing. Like, I will not be lenient with myself, or I will be too lenient with myself. Like, it's finding that balance.
That's something I definitely struggle with as well, is that ability to find balance in my life. And also sort of that self-advocacy component, which is very mentally draining. So I'll find a lot of times if I'm struggling with, whether it's a physical injury or whether it's just my mental health, there's things that you have to do, booking therapy appointments, going to physio, going to doctor's appointments, whatever it is, that if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I just won't do those things. And then that's detrimental to my health, right? So I mean, it's not as detrimental as if you have CP in your instance, I would think, right? Where, you're physically sort of reliant on these activities of keeping active so that you can maintain that ability to function the way you want to. For me, it's similar, but it's a mental thing, right? I need my brain to function properly. And if I'm not taking care of myself, then it's not going to. And then that just creates more problems.
And then you feel worse because like, as adult humans, we can sit here and say, yeah, I know I need to work out. Yeah, I know I need to drink more water. And I know, but why aren't I doing it? Oh, what's wrong with me? And you start going down that cycle. Like, in Europe, all I ate was bread and cheese. Like, it is everywhere. The food is amazing there. And before I went to Europe, it might be a little too detailed, I don't know, but one thing I was realizing I was dealing with was chronic constipation. So I wouldn't go to the bathroom for like a week. I'm not even kidding you. And then when I did, it was like painful, and half an hour later, that kind of thing. So while I was still working for the company that I work for, I decided, okay, I need to get this sorted out before I go traveling, because don't really want to be dealing with this in foreign places. So I went to see a dietitian, and she made me a meal plan. And the second I started following that meal plan, things were great. Peachy keen, right? But it was very limited dairy. Like, almost no dairy, really. And almost no gluten.
Right.
And I'm going to frickin' Europe. I'm like,
bread and cheese.
Oh my God, what am I going to do? So a friend of mine said to me, oh, you won't have these problems in Europe. And I'm like, okay, I know I'm going on vacation and it's going to be magical and everything, but like, that seems far-fetched. She goes, no, like, it's the way they process their food there. Sure enough, I was eating bread, cheese, all day. Nothing happened.
It's not the same kind of bread in Europe that we have here.
All of it, just all the food didn't do that to me. I don't know what it is, but when I'm back now, I've been back since just before Christmas, and it's starting to get, I don't eat too much now because I'm feeling that feeling, But the funny thing is about that was that, like, I didn't realize it, but that's a CP thing too, because of the tightness.
Huh.
But even now, it's just coming up, right? I asked my mom, like, did I have this issue when I was a kid? And she was like, no, that's kind of new for you. I'm like, okay. But the other thing that was, not so great about Europe was that obviously I gained weight because I had been enjoying all the things, creme brulee and, eating out all the time. Yeah. Eating out all the time because we're, it's not like we're staying in hostels. I mean, there were some cooking options, but not a ton. And we want to try the local cuisine. So, and it's harder for me when I have gained more weight to move around. I feel a difference in my mobility. It's harder. So I'm like, okay, not only for my confidence and my own personal preference of how I want to look, but now for my body, I have to lose some weight because otherwise it's going to suck. Like, it's added pressure. So that's an interesting.
Yeah, and weirdly, I wasn't. That wasn't where my mind was going originally, but I can also relate to that because I have a knee injury, and there's like a threshold where, if I'm way more than a certain amount, suddenly I can't play soccer anymore because my knees keep giving out on me. But if I weigh less than a certain amount, then it's okay, everything's fine. Yeah. So yes, that's a tricky thing to navigate as well. Yeah, especially because once you get to that point of things aren't working as well, then it's harder to do the activities required to lose the weight to make it easier.
Well, and then the activities that I love to do, exercising, I had to find new ones because the old ones also hurt my body now because of my back.
Right, so there's a whole other level of
whole
complication.
Thing. So thank goodness my sister made me that weightlifting plan because, she showed me how to do it properly, because that's one thing too, is like if you're lifting weights. Now, let's be honest, I'm not lifting heavy weights yet. Maybe one day, but like I got 8-10 pounds. Like I'm not gonna do too much damage. But if you don't have your form properly when you're lifting any sort of weight, you could fuck something up. And that's the last thing I need.
Right.
So she's like showing me how to do things and watching me do it and being like, okay, like, maybe like squats, for example. When I go down to do a squat, my heels come up every single time, right? That's not what you want. So I just, I don't do as many squats. I definitely don't do any squats with weights. Like I'm just constantly adapting things over and over, finding new ways to do things. And people are like, oh, just get a personal trainer. And it's like, sure. But also,
they'll still need to.
They won't get my limitations. I'll have to sit there and explain my life story and show them why I can't do it. They'll be like, oh, okay. And then they're like, I've never really dealt with this before. And they might push when they shouldn't push. And I, if they say, come on, 10 more, I'm going to be like, yeah, 10 more. I'm going to like mentally push too. Cause if they think I can do it, well, I can do it. Cause I'm not good at finding that like limit.
Right.
And I thought, I used to think I was, and then I realized it was actually my boyfriend who helped me out there, because he kind of was like, well, I need to know, like, what you can and can't do in some areas.
Like when to rein you in, sort of?
Yeah, like, he goes, I'm trying to find your, like, when you need help, like, you should tell me when you need help. I'm like, yeah, of course I will. Well, I wouldn't. And he'd be like, do you need a hand? I'd be like, no, I'm good. And he's like, well, I can just take me 2 seconds. And I realized that one of the things that I was dealing with is this whole, like, I don't need help, like, it's fine, I can do it for myself. Like, this feeling that, and if I'm being honest with myself, it was a huge insecurity, because accepting your disability is a hard thing. And I don't believe, like, everyone says, well, what doesn't define you? And it's like, yes, I know that. I know I do other things other than being disabled, but it certainly defines the way I do things. It dictates a lot about my life, and I'd be lying to myself if I said that. I have to shift and adapt. Sure, I make shit happen. If I want to do something physical, I find a way to make it work because I want to, right? But also, getting help when you need it is okay. I don't have to see somebody who loves me and cares for me offering me help as a personal attack. It's not that they think I can't do it. It's that they want to help make my life easier for that 2 seconds.
And how much of that is you wanting to be able to do things yourself versus not wanting to be reliant on other people?
Oh my God. It's like, those are the 2 things. Those are the 2 aspects. It's like, I want to be able to do that, and I don't want to have to ask you to do it. Like, for example, with my sister, she's strong, she's fit, she's young, she's capable. She doesn't need help with this. Why should I? I'm the older one.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I should not be asking my little sister I should be the one, braiding her hair. But I can't, because I've never learned, because my hands are bad. She can do my hair no problem, So it's getting over that. It's like my boyfriend, when we were in Europe, because my family has always helped me cut my toenails, because when I do it, it's always on an angle. And so you get ingrown toenails because you didn't cut yours properly, but because of the way my hands are, they have a hard time. And same with painting my nails. So my sister always used to do that for me. But then I moved out. I said to my boyfriend, I'm like, I have to go and visit my family, and then maybe they can cut my toenails for me. And he's like, well, why? And I explained it to him. He goes, well, I can just do it for you. And you could do that. He's like, yeah, why not? I'm like, don't you find that like gross or weird that I can't even cut my own toenails? He's like, well, whatever. What does that matter? It takes me 2 minutes. And I'm like, okay. Because if you want me to paint them, I can do that too. Like, he was so accepting of it. And like, I realized in that moment, it wasn't like, his acceptance wasn't what I was looking for. It was amazing. And I'm so glad that he's that guy. And that's why I love him so much. But it's also my own acceptance of letting him do that and that being okay with me. Like, even when my sister used to do it, I'd feel the same way. Like, oh my God, she should not be having to do this for me.
Right. So it wasn't so much the relationship dynamic. It was just being reliant on a new person, and you have to be comfortable with them.
Well, but also just like you, I think you hit it when you said, things I feel that I should be able to do for myself. Mm. Like, it's a vulnerable experience to look at somebody and go, like, especially with my sister, it's also because it was a different thing, because she's younger than me too, and I want to be that older sister that helps her with everything. I want to be big sister. I want to show her how to do her hair. I want to show her how to do her nails. But those are things that I struggle with because of what I deal with. So she actually ends up helping me with them. And it's cute, and she's very good at it. She can do nails really well and hair really well. But like, I wanted to play that role. Mm-hmm. So it's like, and she's always saying, it's not a big deal. I love doing this for you, and I love doing this with you. And so I had to realize that it's not a bad thing. It's just different.
Yeah.
And we're still hanging out, and we're still bonding that way. And I don't lose any of that big sister identity, or my boyfriend isn't, grossed out, or he doesn't feel like my caretaker. Mm-hmm. That's always my thing. It's like, especially when you're dating, you do not want your partner to feel like they have to take care of you.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely understand that to some degree. I don't have a lot of relationship experience in my life. I am a pretty lone wolf type of person. But when my shoulder started to give out on me, and I had to start asking people for help, or just acknowledging there's certain things I can't do anymore, it was a really difficult thing to deal with. It still is. Like, yeah. I still think of myself as the person who can do anything, but there are limitations. I can still do a lot of things. I don't have like that big of a problem with my shoulders. But I was talking to you about this before this show, where if I'm working above my head or something along those lines, it can be tricky. So now if I'm doing a construction job, there's times when I have to hire someone to do certain jobs because I know how to do them and I just physically can't do them. Or when I was renovating my apartment from a sort of that mental perspective, I was really struggling. I'm living in a construction zone at my house, and I'm just so frustrated every day because there's all this work that has to be done, and it all feels so overwhelming. And I had friends say, just ask, like, we're willing to help. Why aren't you just asking? And there's something about that process of asking for help that is so challenging. It's like it's physically very easy to do.
Yeah.
But it's mentally very difficult to do.
I think for me, it always, like, I remember when I was talking about with running, like, it was like my way to defeat CP. I'm trying to get better at it, but asking for help felt like a defeat. Right. It felt like CP was winning in that moment. I can't do this thing, so I need someone else to do it. Point for CP, 0 for Rachel. And it's like, well, fuck. It's easier for me, like my boyfriend and I have this little thing that we do when we're hiking. If there's too steep of a, incline or whatever, and I can't step down without being nervous about it, he'll just say, do you want to take the elevator? And I'm like, yeah, that'd be good. And he just picks me up, puts me down, and we carry on. And that's it. And I think, like, I'm learning, and my family too. My family's helped me out in so many ways. You wouldn't believe, like, driving, trying to teach me how to drive. My dad and I always laugh. My mom too, just like those early days when I thought that I could totally drive no problem on the road, and the almost accidents that would happen because, I'm thinking I'm doing so great on the road. My parents are like, what is going on right now? Why are you doing this? Asking for help is not a weakness. It's a strength because it means that you know yourself, you know your limitations, and you also know that those people in your life, you can rely on them. And that means I had to reframe it in my mind of, like, when I ask people in my life for help, it's showing me that I pick good people. I made a good decision with the people that I choose to surround myself with.
It does sound like you have a very supportive network around you,
yes,
which is great.
Which I'm very aware that that's a privilege, and I'm very lucky, because I know that that's not the case for everyone out there. But I do think that it's hard to realize that you see the world from a different lens than other people, and it's hard to deal with, like, yeah, I've gotten some nasty comments along the way, and it's hard to know whether to educate or not.
Right. Like, when is it worth it to try to educate someone?
When is it worth it? And oftentimes it's not, unfortunately. I find as I get older, I'm much more choosy. Like, if somebody says something rude, I kind of gauge, like, all right, was that, like, ignorance based? Like, do they just not know what they're saying, or do they know, are they trying to be hurtful? If they're trying to be hurtful, it's not worth my time or energy to engage them in any way. I have some really quick one-offs that I use. Like, for example, if someone says, and I've had this, like, I'm in a store and some guy walks up to me and he goes, what's wrong with your legs? I'll either A, say nothing, what's wrong with yours? Or B, I pretend like I just noticed something's wrong with me. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you're limping. I'm limping? What do you mean I'm limping? What's wrong with me? Well, I don't know. It's like, dude. So I just watch them fall apart, and it's kind of fun.
That's amazing.
Or I will tell them. I'll be like, yeah, I have a disability. Oh, what is it? And I'm like, well, I have cerebral palsy. And they're like, never heard of that. And I'm like, well, fuck, Google it, buddy. or I get the ones that's like, my aunt's sister's cousin's best friend's dog has that. And I'm like, great. Can I connect you guys on Facebook? Maybe you guys want to talk and be friends. Like, do you know anything else about this dog other than its chronic illness? Like, will we actually vibe together? You know what I mean? like people think that, like, if you have the same illness, you're just going to be besties. And it's kind of funny. Sometimes it's true. Like, sometimes you can find those similarities. But like I said to you before, sometimes CP is a really wide range. It can be really mild and really severe. And I've had somebody with CP in my life tell me once that I've met, be like, oh, well, you don't have it that bad. What do I say? What do I say to that? Like, yeah, you're right. I can walk and you can't. And I'm sorry for that. And I'm sorry that, you feel like I don't belong here in this moment, but I'm here. So hi.
Right.
Like, how do you get around that? You just don't. You just swallow it and you push forward. And I think that's, for me, the pain kind of helps with that, because it's like, despite the chronic stuff that I deal with every day. I still have life. I have a job.
Mm-hmm.
I have responsibilities. My problem is sometimes I take on too much. And because it's like, I want to do all the things because I can do anything because why not? You know, everybody else can do stuff. So can I, but it's like, yes, but you're doing like 6 things and not all of those 6 things you're going to do at 100%. Mm-hmm. So why don't you be more selective with what you do so that you can really give yourself to those things, you know, and you'll find that you get better results. You feel better about that.
Yeah. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm drawing a parallel here between the way that trans and well, queer people in general are treated. And one in that, you know, oh, you're trans? Do you know so-and-so who's also trans? Right? Like there's a bit of that, but also I feel like there's a responsibility for allies to step in a lot of the time. Like when I'm getting hurtful comments because of being trans, I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to respond to this. But at the same time, someone should educate this person. Like, why should it always be me doing that? Yeah. We need allies to step in and take on that role because it's too much for the group that's being targeted to handle by themselves. I don't know if you see it the same way, but, you know, that's kind of my theory is why should you, for instance, have to deal with the burden of trying to educate all of these people that, you know, want to make rude comments in public? Why can't someone else come over and say, hey, that's not appropriate? And by the way, this is sort of how we deal with things if they're educated enough to do that.
I feel like it's just a sense of entitlement. Like people feel like they can just walk up to anybody and find out what's up with them. And it's like, this is, you know, I don't owe you this information. Sorry, but like, dude, you need to get a hobby that isn't this. But I also feel like it's just a matter of like, would you like it? Like it's that split second where you stop and think, would I like it if some person walk up to me and ask me a question about something that I have no control over that maybe on some days I'm a little insecure about? You know? And I mean, I'm very aware that when I walk into a room or when I meet people for the first time, they see it. They see that I'm limping on in there and immediately they're wondering sometimes before they even know my name, especially with work meetings when I'm, you know, walking into meetings sometimes without knowing somebody, they're going, oh, what's up with that? In their head, right? And it's not malicious. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a curiosity. Now, 90% of those people know that it's not appropriate to just come out and ask right away. But you still see the look on their face. It's like, oh, there it is. And they're wondering about it. And they moved on. Like it's a split. You can read them. I can see the split. I can see, like, and it's a split second. Because really, when you're in a meeting, and this is what I love about work, it's about the work. Like they might be curious about it for 30 seconds. And like, anyway, whatever. Back to what we're doing, right? And so you get that distraction. A little harder when you're in the middle of the grocery store and, you know, Karen has some questions, because she just feels she needs to know.
Right. Entitled to.
And it's also, I struggle because I can be too nice sometimes. And like, I'm like, I don't really want to, like, I've had to learn to be more assertive and be like, I'm going to give you one of my quick comebacks because I just don't want to deal with this. And that's fine. Like, I don't have to be the nice person with a disability that is the educator of all. It's ridiculous. And, you know, it's just that, I mean, I just wish people would stop and say, is this the way I would want to be treated? But, I mean, not everyone has that level of capacity.
Right.
To do that.
And on the note of interacting with other people, is there some language that you want to point out as far as this is good language to use, this is bad language to use when you're referring to people with disabilities?
Oh, it's changed for me over the years. I can only speak for myself on this one. I have no problem with saying, like, I'm disabled. I know there's a lot of people that say I'm a person with a disability. I'm just full on disabled. That's fine with me. I'm fine with, like, I call myself a cripple all the time. My parents drives me crazy for some reason. They're like, oh, because they are used to it as being a derogatory thing. So like, oh, I hate that you say that about yourself. That. Well, I'm just like, I don't care. Like, I say it to be funny. I like to them because I know that it kind of makes them all, you know, wigged out. But I don't know. The one thing that does bug me though is the what's wrong with you thing. Is it nothing really? Like, I think I'm all right. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, yeah, it looks a little weird. I get it, but it's not wrong. It just is.
Right. And if it is wrong, then everyone has something that's wrong with them, right?
Yeah. And it also, like, I think we were talking about this before the show. Like, I've been called, I worked retail, and it was busy Christmas time, and I was reading someone through cash register, and this woman literally said to me, she goes, well, aren't you a cute little crippled Christmas elf?
Wow.
And I was like, oh. And that was like the first time I was like, I don't even think I was 20 yet. And that was the first time I'd been called like cripple. And I just joked about it 5 seconds ago. But that's me joking about it. Or, you know, my parents making them uncomfortable for fun. Right? But when you're called something in a derogatory way, now she said it in a like, hee, I'm being cutesy. But it's like, lady, are you kidding me? Like, we all know that you didn't say that to be nice. Because you could have said a cute little elf, because it's Christmas, and I get it. I didn't have a uniform on or anything, but, you know, I would have let that go. But the crippled Christmas elf thing, that stuck with me. And that's a comment that I carry around. So for me, I think it's more how you use the word.
Right.
That I have an issue with. Crippled used to bother me, but I guess you're right in the sense I'm trying to reclaim it. I think for me, I'm trying to get used to it again, so I say it more to, like, hear it in a not that way. Right.
And do you think it depends on who it's coming from? Like, if someone doesn't have a disability, but they're using that word, would that be a problem?
I don't think it's, if somebody said to me innocently, like, are you crippled? In terms of instead of disabled, I'd be like, yeah. If they were asking it as a question. But it's like, oh, you stupid cripples running around everywhere. It's like, whoa, so it really depends on the intent and the phrasing of it. I told you that story about the little 5-year-old boy. I was just walking home one day and passed a park, and he ran up to me and in the most politely way he could and said, excuse me, miss. And I went, yeah. And he was like, are you mentally retarded? And I was like, honestly, if I'm being honest, I laughed because he's 5 and he doesn't know any better. And his mother immediately came over and was like, oh my God, Jimmy, you can't say that to people. And she's trying to explain it. And this kid just genuinely, what he was asking was, is that what is wrong with you? Like, almost like he was trying to diagnose me, right? With a word he had heard at school. And so I took that moment and I chose to educate that little boy because maybe I was the first person he had seen with a disability. I feel like I'm a little biased towards younger kids because I'm very aware that they might not be as exposed to that in their little lives, when they're younger.
Or processing like the intricacies of what things mean.
They're kids. They're learning. And adults should know better. And I don't know. I was taught, like, treat people how you want to be treated.
Right. Absolutely.
That's how I was raised. And so I would never walk up to somebody and just ask them what's wrong with them. And sure, I have moments in my life where I see other people that are disabled. I mean, I'm human. I'm not going to deny this. But I go, oh, I wonder what they have. I wonder if it's... And a lot of times they're going, is that CP? Does that person have CP too? Maybe. Like, when we were in Europe, I think we were in Greece. And we were sitting on the beach. And we saw this guy running down the beach. And my boyfriend actually said to me, he goes, does that guy have CP? Oh, looks like he does. And I'm like, you get excited for some weird reason. It's like, oh, one of us. Right. It's like, and look, he's running. I was joking with him and I said, oh my God, I should send my physio guy a picture of someone with CP running. And then my boyfriend was like, yes, but it's the scoliosis that keeps you from running. I'm like, oh, dang. We have to acknowledge that we're not perfect. We do fuck up. And I do catch myself even wondering what might be, someone's diagnosis or what might be, like, is that similar to me? Is that arthritis? Is that this and that? Maybe they understand chronic pain.
I'm kind of curious about that experience of in the moment. Like, if you recognize someone who also has a disability, or maybe it's CP, right? And you're like, one of us, this is great.
Yeah.
Are you ignoring them or are you reaching out to them? Because there's this thing in the trans community where when you clock another person as being trans, you almost completely ignore them. Like, I'm not going to bring attention to it. Like, this is so cool that I saw them, but I'm going to ignore them completely. is it that, or is it like, I'm going to go over them, introduce myself, want to chat about it?
If I wasn't already talking to that person, I wouldn't just run up to somebody and be like, hey, do you have cerebral palsy? Because me too. Can we be friends? Like, nah, like live your life. But if I'm chatting with you and it comes up, usually with new people in my life, it will eventually. A lot of times I have new friends who maybe they've only known me for a couple of weeks. They go, what did you do to yourself? Like, when are you going to heal? They think I, sprained an ankle and I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, no, this is permanent. They're like, fuck. And then they feel really bad. Right? Like, oh my God. But, sometimes it comes up that way. When you're talking, you're like, you tell your war stories, right? You're like, oh, I have CP and, and then they go, wait, you have CP? Yeah. Like, so do I. No way. And then it starts. It's like, well, what type of CP do you have? Well, where do you affected? Well, do you get chronic pain? Because not all of us are the same. There's all different types, right? Some people don't experience chronic pain with CP. Some people, experience much worse spasticity. So they're, shaking a little bit more, whereas I only experience it when I'm having a spasm. Those kinds of things. It's like when I find out somebody's a preemie, deep down inside, I'm like, oh, what did you come out of that with? Like, I got this, what did you get? And they're like, one of the funnier things that I ended up with was a caffeine addiction. Now you might be thinking, like all of us, right? But they actually, because I was born 3 months early, they used caffeine to keep my heart beating. Oh. When I was first born, and I would go into cold blue, I would die, and then they put me back on the caffeine, and it would restart my heart, and off I went. Huh. So they kept me on it until I was strong enough to be without it, and then they told my parents, like, hey, when she starts drinking coffee, there's a very good chance she's going to get a raging caffeine addiction. And they were like, cool, that's the least of our concern at this moment, right? Because they're dealing with all the other stuff. And sure enough, in high school, like I was 13 or 14, and I had a cup of coffee, and
that was it.
Every day ever since. Huh. Yeah. And in university, it got to like 5 cups a day because, you're trying to get through. And
You're
I realized.
Fine. I was at 14.
14. Oh, wow. Okay. So yeah, I thought 5 was a lot. I was like, better tone this down.
It was at my work. It was free. So I'm like, coffee all the time.
That's like film sets.
What do you think people need to be more considerate of or aware of when it comes to people with disabilities, speaking with people who are disabled or whatever it might be?
I think, obviously, we've said this, everyone has a different opinion. But I'm of the thought of, like, treat me like you would any of your other friends. And if you're worried about something, ask me. Like if you want to do something super physical and you want me to come along, but you're not sure, so let me make my own calls on things. If I decide that I'm going to sit this one out, that's cool. And just be cool with it. I have friends sometimes who will push when I say, oh, no, you know what? I can't do that. And they're like, oh, no, you totally can. And it's like, I don't think so. And then it's this awkward situation where do I go and make an ass of myself? Or do I stick to my guns? Like, they mean well, they just want me there. And if I'm being 100% honest, sometimes they're right. Sometimes I do try it, and I do it. And I'm like, cool, that's a new thing I didn't know I could do. But it's a balance,
Right. So it's about wanting to be invited, but also having your boundaries respected. Kind of striking that balance.
Yeah, for sure. You get overly cautious when you spend a lot of time falling down, or, you're like, is this going to make me hurt myself? Because I've had 2 concussions already. Not so great to have another one, right? So there's all these things that I'm like keeping track of. The skin on my knees is a different color than the rest, just from scraping them, right? And so you get kind of puck shy. You're like, ooh, is this going to make me fall again? Like, right. I don't know.
So you need like some gentle pushing.
Sometimes you do, because it's just, and I don't have an anxiety disorder, but sometimes it is. It's just anxiety. You're just anxious. It's just fear. And you just have to full send and and go. I'm just trying to think of myself, like, if there's anything. I mean, I guess, yeah, what's wrong with you is kind of an awkward thing to ask somebody.
Right, don't ask. Think before you speak, maybe.
But I mean, I've even, like I admitted, if you go back in the tape, I've had that thought myself, like when I see somebody, I'm like trying to figure it out too. Difference is I know not to say it out loud. you know.
Are you thinking like what's wrong with this person, or are you thinking like what does this person have?
Yeah,
like it's just framed differently.
Yeah, it's maybe? Like what have they got? You know, how are they dealing with it? And you know, because you're always trying to find someone, like we talked about, who maybe has CP or something, so we can trade off like tips and tricks too, because that person gets it. Like I have a really great medical team, like my physio guy, he's incredible. He really listens, which is nice, because, you know, a lot of medical practitioners, they don't, but he does. But he also doesn't have CP. So he's going off of me giving him, you know, my insight on how I'm feeling or whatever, and giving suggestions based on that. Whereas, you know, a physio with CP, oh my God, if that was possible, if you're out there, come find me, because, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think there's a way that I would prefer to be spoken to. Just remember that the people who have disabilities are more than their disability. And if you see, this is something that I don't relate to personally, but it does bother me. If there is someone in a wheelchair who has someone assisting them, like a hired care worker or just a friend, don't talk to the person who's helping them like they're going to answer for the person in the wheelchair. Talk to the person in the wheelchair. If they can't answer you, you'll find out pretty quickly. Like, it's just a respect thing. Like, they're a person too. Drives me crazy when I see that.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of it's coming back to that one comment you made earlier, which is just treat people the way you want to be treated.
Yeah, and I think people forget that because sometimes disability isn't pretty. And I think it's a hard pill to swallow. Like, sometimes you want to look away because it's too much. You're like, oh, whoa. And you feel awkward. And I've seen it when I have spasm in public and people are kind of staring. They don't know what to do. People like call the hospital. I'm like, please don't use medical resources for this. I'll be fine. And, you know, it's good. I promise you it'll be fine.
So you're able to communicate that in the moment.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I've had a few, like, you know, when you're in school and you're in elementary school and they're like, call somebody. And it's like, please do not. I can't go to the hospital for this. There's nothing they can do other than give me painkillers. Like,
I imagine that's so much more challenging in a place like the US too, where someone calls and suddenly you're on the hook for a big bill.
And I can't even imagine how like that must feel. Anyone with chronic medical conditions in the US, I feel for. Canada's is not perfect either.
No.
For sure. But I feel like it can be better in some ways. It's inconsistent in Canada.
Well, we should probably also mention, even though it doesn't apply to either of us, but the rates, disability rates, the amount that people are given on a monthly basis if they're not able to work, have not been rising with inflation. They're no longer something that you can really live off of. I don't know
can't
how
even
people
think
do
about
it.
that. Or I know people who are in. This is gonna really grind your gears. I have friends who are in a wheelchair. She's in a wheelchair and she wants to move out because, hello, she's an adult and she wants to move out. But she's on disability and the government will not pay for somebody to be nighttime care. So if she were to move out and something happened, like an emergency, like a fire or something, there'd be no one there to help her.
There's also an instance where someone I know had a disability, were on disability, but were living with a partner who was working. And because the partner was working and bringing in just enough money, the person who had the disability didn't qualify to get money anymore. So now the person who's making a pretty meager income is responsible for being the caretaker of that other person. And the problem became that the person who had the disability was also abusive. And so the partner wasn't able to escape the situation because they were on the hook for taking care of the partner who was abusing them. So it became this horrible situation where she no longer had the finances to get out of there because the finances were going to him. So there's all sorts of horrible instances like that occur. You know, you should treat people like two separate beings, even if they're in a relationship with each other, I think.
Yeah,
right?
and I don't think, like, I think it's the US, but I mean, probably here too, where if you get married, you lose your disability or whatever.
Well, this was the same type of situation where they were common law. So they weren't married, but the same sort of rules applied.
No,
where I think, and it was a pretty low threshold. I think it was if she was making more than $2,000 a month, then he was no longer eligible for disability. So, now she's supporting 2 people on $2,000 a month.
Yeah, how does that fix the problem? Mm-hmm. And that's so.
And he doesn't have financial independence because it's not like she's giving him an allowance or something like that he can go out and buy things with. So, it's just not good for anyone involved.
Independence is a good word because I feel like that can get lost.
Mm-hmm.
For people who have severe disabilities, and I feel like that needs to change. That would be my point to end on, is everyone deserves some independence, big or small. Like, I even feel as a 27-year-old woman, like, the guilt I feel for not being able to drive is astronomical. And everybody in my life is like, it's okay if you don't drive. Now, I won't say I've given up on it because I have a car with hand controls and I constantly keep, saying I want to learn. I'm waiting until the weather gets better, easier to practice again. It's been a long time since I've driven. Mm-hmm. But, my parents, my partner, they are fantastic in saying it doesn't matter. It's not that big of a deal. It's just driving. It's no biggie. I'm like, big biggie. All I want to do is go to the grocery store by myself. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to drive to work if it's really raining and I don't want to take transit. Mm-hmm. Go meet friends, and it's just.
You hear that from seniors all the time, right? Where they have to give up their license and they go, I feel like I've lost my independence. So
and unfortunately, that's something I've never learned how to do. I feel like it would be harder to lose it. Like, I feel like it would be harder to drive for 60 years and then you're like,
taken away
you
from
can't
you.
do it anymore. Yeah, that's because you grieve that loss. Mm-hmm. Whereas I'm just frustrated. And that's the other thing I should mention that is common, is the anger that comes with being disabled. There is anger there. And, like, for me anyway, I have a lot of anger inside of me. And it's very hard to control sometimes.
That's like a frustration with the cards that you were dealt, sort of.
A frustration day to day. Like, sometimes takes me 5 minutes to do up the button on my pants. Not because I've had one too many tacos, but because buttons were something I struggled with as a kid. And sometimes it still is a struggle, motor skill wise, right? Tying my shoes. I learned how to tie my shoes when I was, I want to say 6 or 7, which is pretty normal. But some days I just can't do it. I'm like, what the fuck's going on here? And why is this taking me so long? And this is really embarrassing, especially when you're with people and all of a sudden you're just like, can't tie your shoe and they're waiting for you and you're kind of squatting, or for me, I'm like bending over and I'm like, eventually it'll work again, It's just, it gets frustrating. All those little like notches where every time it happens and you just, okay, whatever, I just gotta get through it. Or, I don't want to show that I'm upset right now. Don't want to ruin the mood. I want to keep, that preservation of the good and the stifling of the bad. Sometimes I have days where I'm just a puddle. I'm a mess because I bottle all that down, and you have to let it out sometimes. But you also, like, I feel like I do a lot of protecting the people that I care about. Like my parents, for example. I try not to tell them every time I fall. I try not to tell them every time somebody says something stupid to me, because it almost hurts and angers them more than me.
Right.
Sometimes. Right. And I'm like, okay. So I shouldn't say can't, because I always can, but if I don't want to tell, my parents, my family, or some of my friends, or my boyfriend, who the hell do I tell that to? And yes, I've been in and out of therapy, but like, for the most part, I'm doing pretty good at this point in my life. It's just a thing that happens, right? Who do I let that out to? And it's that thing of like, who do I burden this with?
Right.
That's what it comes down to. Like, who can I burden my sad story with? And I hate that narrative because honestly, I believe that everybody has a sad story. Everybody has hardships in their life. And I never want to lead with that. I never want to, be the girl with the disability. But I am a girl with a disability. The fact of life.
Right.
It's why I'm here.
That's what we're talking about.
You know, and I think there's this balance of like, even at 27, sometimes there's resistance to accepting myself.
Right.
And I have to accept that. Like, I took up boxing because I thought, well, that's going to be a great way to get it out. And it was fantastic. Like, you go in there, you hit the bag, you learn how to hit stuff, and holy crap, you come out of there, you feeling really good. So I've tried to translate that into exercise, into the writing that I do, into the music that I write. But yeah, sometimes just gotta hit something. Not someone, something.
Something. Yeah.
Yeah.
My mom always used to say, punch a pillow.
Yeah.
So we're sort of getting close to the end here. Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you wanted to bring up before we wrap things up?
Just because we're disabled doesn't mean we can't be assholes, or that we can't be abusive, or that we can't, it's not a get out of jail free card. Right? I have ex-partners who had suffered from depression. And I ended the relationship because of that. And the guilt. Oh, you wouldn't believe the guilt. But it's like, I learned that on top of what I deal with every day, dealing with, having a partner with severe mental health issues was not a good fit. But the main piece of that I will stress is that, that person at the time wasn't taking care of themselves, which doesn't help. So I will say, if you have a disability, yes, it's hard, but it's your responsibility. And that's a hard fucking pill to swallow, I will tell you, because it's a lot of work. And unfortunately, it's not on anybody else but you to better your situation. You can get help. There is support. There's a lot of great organizations out there, and family and friends, if you've got them, amazing. And it's double-edged sword, because I was talking about, asking for help is okay earlier, right? And yes, but all these things are about balance. I think that's the theme of this podcast, because it's like, yeah, ask for help, but don't, overdo it to the point where you're not taking care of yourself at all. Yeah.
Well, and I think everyone has their individual struggles that they have to go through to figure out what that balance looks like. And when it comes to, like, even if that person had been taking care of their mental health, that doesn't mean that it's not going to display itself in ways that maybe another person isn't able to engage with. Like, I've had experiences where I've had relationships with other trans people. They're great people. There's nothing wrong with them. Some of them were taking care of themselves better than others, but a lot of them I couldn't deal with the relationship dynamic, because I have dysphoria, they have dysphoria. When you put us together, we set each other off. And so that dynamic just didn't work. And even though we're both probably great people when we're apart, when we're together, it didn't work out, right?
You just bring out the worst, for lack of a better term. Yeah. I mean, it's all about balance. It's okay to set limits, I think. And it's that's a good point to end on, I think. It's okay to set limits with yourself. It's okay to push your limits sometimes. It's okay to, if your partner has a disability, if your parents are disabled, like, you need to take care of yourself too, as the non-disabled party there. Because, CP is never ending. I will have it for the rest of my life. It will get worse. And that's a conversation that my boyfriend and I had to have. So I'm like, listen, I could be in a wheelchair one day. Could be. Don't know if it's going to happen, but it's a possibility. And he's like, okay, I'm good with that. It's serious shit. And it's scary, because they could be like, oh, geez, that's not for me. But you have to have the tough conversations.
Right.
So I would say dating with a disability, which is something we didn't touch on, but honesty, you got to be honest. You got to be honest with what your limitations are. You got to be honest about how you're kind of progressing. If you're progressing, what your goals are there, like your partner. If you're thinking long term with them, like they should know, and they should be able to assess for themselves whether or not they want to be a part of that. And if they don't, it doesn't mean they're an asshole. Doesn't mean they're a bad person. Just means that they are not wanting to handle that, and that's okay. That's fine. I think that's fine. I've had many dating experiences when I was single, doing online dating, where, before the date, I always would tell them, hey, I have a disability, I have a slight limp, like, you're going to see when we hang out. And then we hang out and they're like, oh. And I could see, like, they are so uncomfortable. They don't know how to talk to me. It's like a mess. And so, they said, look, like, I can't do that. I'm like, hey, that's totally cool. We went out for coffee. Low investment. And you know what? Honestly, I don't want to date somebody that can't handle it because, hello, this isn't going anywhere. But I've also had people that said that they wouldn't want to date me because I'm too short for them. Because I, don't like country music. So it really, just be yourself.
Yeah, I heard some great dating advice, which was you go on a few dates with someone you're seeing if it's a good match. You're getting along with them well, and at some point, just you have a date where you lay out all of your baggage, and then you just see if there's any deal breakers on the table, and that way you don't have to get 2 years down the line and find out this isn't working for whatever reason.
Yeah, you know how they say don't discuss religion, politics, all that on a first date? I'm like, let's do it.
Do it all.
If you support Trump, I want to know right now so I can,
I'm not wasting my time.
Yeah, and from 2016 to 2020, that was one of the things. I was like, I got to talk about it. And, you might think that's a little much, but it really moves things along because you see, like you said, deal breakers, right? What are people, and this is disabled or not, like everybody has their deal breakers. I know people with disabilities that only want to date people with disabilities because they're like, yeah, I want somebody that may understand what I feel. And that's fine. It limits your dating pool a heck of a lot, but you know what? If that's what makes you comfortable, go for it.
Usually I like to end the episodes with something that the audience can do if they're interested in doing some kind of advocacy work or championing an issue. So in this case, what would your advice to the audience be if they're thinking, I'm feeling passionate about what we've talked about today. I want to do something to help people with disabilities. What am I doing? Are there organizations they could volunteer with? Is there activism that they can do online? Like, whatever it might be.
Yes. Okay. I'll give them a task and I'll give them some organizations that are great. GF Strong is a great organization that helps people with disabilities and people who are recovering from stroke rehabilitation. VAMPS, Vancouver Adapted Music Society. They help people with disabilities that are musicians play and get their music out there. There's Kickstart, Disability Arts and Culture, which I'll just mention in passing. They help artists get paid for their work. I actually am the board president of that organization. So please check that out. You can be a member. We have memberships online and you can learn more about all the workshops and lovely programming that our people are working on. There's always something going on and a lot of it is free or close to it. So it's very inclusive that way. A challenge for you guys would be to create a scenario where you would be slightly disabled, meaning try to, not use a certain limb for a while. Maybe you want to plug your ears, or cover your eyes, or, my dad always says that CP is like tying belts around your legs and trying to walk. Try that. Try to not talk for a certain amount of time. Try to pick a cup up when your hands are shaking, right? I'm mimicking a spasm right now because I get these, so I can do that. When my hands are clawed like this, and obviously this is not happening. This is what it looks like, right? See how that feels. See how that feels in public. And imagine what it would be like to not be able to stop when you start to get embarrassed.
Right.
I think the best thing to do is to have, it's not possible to feel it exactly, but it'll give you some awareness of like, oh, geez, that is awkward or that is difficult, and just see how it feels.
Thank you for everything that you've brought up today, for having this conversation with me. This has been a conversation about disabilities on a social justice podcast. I'm your host, Nicola Spurling. We've been joined by Rachael Ransom, and thanks again for joining us. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
You've been listening to a social justice podcast hosted by Nicola Spurling, brought to you by The Flag Shop and inspired by a social justice coloring book.